After that moment of mockery, the courtroom fell uncomfortably quiet. It was not the respectful kind of silence judges usually demanded. It was heavier than that. Thick, awkward, the kind that made people suddenly aware of their own breathing, their own posture, the way their eyes refused to meet anyone else's. No one spoke. No one moved. The jury sat frozen, hands folded too tightly, eyes locked forward as if afraid that even blinking might draw attention. The attorneys on both sides stood stiff beside their tables, legal pads forgotten, mouths slightly open with no words ready to come out. A few spectators shifted in their seats, then stopped, as if the sound of fabric against wood felt inappropriate in this moment. All eyes rested on the same place. A black teenage girl stood alone before the bench. She did not pace. She did not fidget. Her hands were relaxed at her sides, her shoulders straight, but not defiant. There was no smugness on her face, no fear either, just a quiet stillness that felt completely out of place in a room built on hierarchy and intimidation. Only minutes earlier, she had been the punchline. Some had laughed openly. Others hid their smiles behind hands or paperwork. A few had looked away, embarrassed not for her, but for what they assumed she was about to do to herself by standing there without a licensed attorney beside her. A kid playing lawyer, a child wasting the court's time, a mistake that would be corrected quickly and publicly. Now no one was smiling. Judge Richard Patterson sat motionless behind the bench. His gavel lay untouched near his right hand. The sharp tongue he was known for had vanished. The condescending smirk that usually lived on his face during proceedings was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar and deeply unsettling to him: uncertainty. His eyes stayed on the girl, but they no longer looked down. The court had seen this man dismantle seasoned attorneys with a sentence. It had seen him humiliate defendants who stepped out of line. His reputation was built on control, on reminding people exactly where they stood the moment they forgot. But control had slipped, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. The girl shifted her weight slightly, the movement small enough that only those closest noticed. The sound of her shoe against the floor echoed more than it should have. A bailiff swallowed hard. Somewhere in the back row, someone exhaled as if they had been holding their breath for too long. Whatever had just happened was not supposed to happen. The rules were clear in rooms like this. Authority spoke first. Authority spoke last. Authority decided when silence began and when it ended. Yet the silence now did not belong to the judge. It belonged to the space between what everyone expected and what they had just witnessed. The prosecutors avoided looking at one another. One of them slowly closed a folder that no longer felt useful. Another rubbed his temple, eyes narrowing not in anger, but in calculation. Something had shifted, and they could feel it, even if they could not yet name it. The girl lifted her gaze, steady and unhurried, meeting the room without challenge. There was no victory in her expression, only resolve. She had not raised her voice. She had not begged for respect. She had not tried to impress anyone. She had simply spoken, and that had been enough to fracture something invisible but essential. Judge Patterson finally inhaled, a sharp breath that sounded louder than his gavel ever had. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. For the first time in years, he seemed unsure of which word would restore the order he relied on. Around him, the courtroom waited, not for a ruling, not for an objection, but for permission to understand what this moment meant. No one yet realized that they were no longer watching a trial unfold. They were watching a system hesitate, a hierarchy falter, a long-held certainty crack under the weight of an unexpected voice. And in that unbearable silence, with a teenage girl standing calmly at its center, the courtroom began to understand that something far more dangerous than disobedience had just occurred: clarity. At that moment, the courtroom realized it was not watching a trial anymore. It was watching the system confront itself. The story did not begin in that courtroom. It began months earlier, far from polished wood benches and raised voices, in a quiet stretch of suburban Chicago where nothing ever seemed urgent unless you lived there long enough to notice the cracks. Maya Brooks lived in a modest brick house with her grandmother, Clara Brooks. The lawn was trimmed. The curtains were always open. From the outside, it looked like the kind of place people passed without a second glance. Inside, the house was filled with books. Clara had been a public school teacher for nearly 4 decades. History, civics, reading comprehension. She believed knowledge was not something you showed off. It was something you carried quietly, like good posture or good manners. Maya had learned that early. At 17, she moved through the world without drawing attention to herself. No flashy clothes, no loud opinions. At school, teachers knew her as polite and sharp. Classmates knew her as the girl who finished early and waited patiently. No one knew how much she already understood. She never corrected adults when they underestimated her. She simply listened. Clara often reminded her, usually over breakfast or while folding laundry, that the law was built to protect people who respected it. That rules existed for a reason, that systems worked when you followed them carefully and honestly. Maya believed that. She believed that if you documented everything, read carefully, and spoke respectfully, the system would respond in kind. She believed fairness was slow, sometimes frustrating, but ultimately dependable. That belief had never been tested until she met Teresa Carter. Teresa lived 3 blocks away, in a low-rise apartment building that had seen better years. Paint peeled near the stairwells. The elevator broke down twice a month. She worked long shifts at a medical supply warehouse and still came home exhausted and worried. One afternoon, Maya overheard Teresa arguing quietly with a property manager near the mailboxes. Her voice shook as she tried to explain something that clearly was not being heard. They say, "I violated the lease." I did not. It is just me and my kids. The man barely looked at her as he spoke. Policy is policy. You have 30 days. Maya did not step in right away. She waited until the manager left, until Teresa leaned against the wall and covered her face with one hand. When Maya asked if she was okay, Teresa laughed bitterly. That was when the story spilled out. An eviction notice. A landlord claiming lease violations that made no sense. No money for a lawyer, no family nearby, just fear. Maya asked simple questions. Did you keep your lease? Do you have payment records? Any emails? Teresa nodded, confused by the calm tone of the girl asking them. That night, Maya spread the documents across her desk. She read slowly, carefully, every line. The landlord's claims were vague. The lease terms were clear. The timeline did not add up. It was not complicated. It was careless. And it was wrong. When Maya told Teresa she thought she could help, Teresa looked at her for a long moment before shaking her head. "You are sweet, baby, but courts do not work like that." Maya smiled, small and steady. They work the way they are written. Clara was less convinced. She listened quietly as Maya explained the situation, then set her mug down with care. "You are young, Maya, and the law does not always reward being right." Maya understood the warning. She just did not accept it. She believed preparation mattered. She believed clarity mattered. She believed truth mattered. Friends cautioned her too. Teachers raised their eyebrows. A neighbor laughed and said judges did not like surprises. Maya heard all of it. She just trusted something else more. By the time the court date arrived, her folder was neat and organized. Tabs labeled, notes handwritten. Every claim matched to a rule. Every rule matched to a source. As she walked toward the courthouse for the first time, the building looked exactly as she had imagined. Solid, orderly, serious. She took a breath and stepped inside, unaware that her age and her skin would matter more to that room than the facts she carried. At that moment, she still believed the system rewarded those who respected it. The courthouse smelled like old paper and disinfectant. Maya noticed it the moment she walked through the security checkpoint. The clink of the metal detector, the bored glance from the guard, the quiet shuffle of people who had been here before and already knew how this place worked. Teresa did not. She clutched her purse with both hands as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. Her eyes darted around the hallway, taking in the framed portraits of judges, the flags, the sealed doors with numbers stenciled in black. "I should have found a lawyer," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "I knew this was a mistake." Maya stopped walking and turned to her. "It is not a mistake," she said calmly. "You asked for help. That is not wrong." Teresa tried to smile, but fear crept into her voice. "They told me no one would take the case. They said it was not worth their time." Maya nodded. She had heard the same words. Not worth it. Too small. No money in it. She had not told Teresa how many offices she had called, how many polite rejections she had thanked people for, How many times she had hung up and stared at her notebook, wondering how something so clear on paper could matter so little to the people paid to protect it. The courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called their case. Inside, the room was already alive with quiet judgment. People turned, some curious, some amused, a few openly skeptical. When Maya stepped forward beside Teresa, there was a pause. Judge Richard Patterson looked up from his bench, his expression already shaped by assumption. He scanned the room, then stopped at Maya and frowned. "Who is representing the plaintiff?" he asked. Maya took one step forward. "I am, Your Honor." The silence that followed was thin and brief, quickly replaced by a ripple of restrained laughter. Someone in the back coughed, badly hiding a chuckle. Judge Patterson leaned back slightly in his chair. "You are representing her?" "Yes, Your Honor." He tilted his head, eyes narrowing. "And where is your attorney, Miss Carter?" Teresa opened her mouth, then closed it. Maya spoke instead. "There is no attorney, Your Honor. I am representing Ms. Carter today." That did it. The judge let out a short laugh, sharp and dismissive. "This is not a classroom exercise," he said. "This is a court of law." More quiet laughter. Someone whispered something that sounded like kid. Maya felt Teresa shift beside her. She could feel the weight of the room pressing in, urging her to shrink, to apologize, to explain herself away. Judge Patterson tapped his pen against the bench. "Let me be clear," he said. "You are not licensed to practice law in this court." Maya nodded. "I am aware, Your Honor. I am appearing on behalf of my client under self-representation provisions." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Provisions." He leaned forward now, interest mixing with irritation. "And how old are you, Miss?" "Brooks." "Maya Brooks. I am 17. A murmur spread through the courtroom, louder this time. 17. The judge repeated slowly, as if tasting the number. "And you believe you are qualified to argue a housing case before this court?" Maya did not answer right away. She thought of Teresa's kids, of the eviction notice taped crookedly to a door, of the lawyers who said no without even opening the file. She thought of her grandmother's voice, calm, careful, trust the process. "Yes, Your Honor," she said. The judge shook his head, almost amused. "This is a serious matter, not a debate club, not a school play. You cannot simply walk in here and pretend." The word pretend landed hard. Maya felt something tighten in her chest. Not anger, not fear. Recognition. This was the moment people warned her about, the one where doing everything right would not be enough. Judge Patterson glanced toward the defense table, then back at Maya. "I am not inclined to indulge this spectacle." Spectacle. Another laugh from somewhere behind her. Maya stood very still. She knew the choice now. She could apologize. She could step back. She could let Teresa speak for herself and watch the case collapse under pressure. Or she could do something far more dangerous. She could speak when she was not invited to. When Maya lifted her eyes again, her voice was quiet, steady. "With respect, Your Honor, I am not here to perform. I am here because my client followed her lease, paid her rent, and is being evicted without cause. The law is clear on that." The laughter stopped. The judge's smile faded just slightly. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not rush. She simply stood there, grounded, refusing to retreat. This was no longer about confidence. It was about crossing a line she had been taught not to cross, and stepping fully into it. The judge stared at her as if he had not expected resistance to sound so measured. For a brief second, Richard Patterson seemed unsure whether to be offended or entertained. He chose neither. Instead, he straightened in his chair, the hint of amusement draining from his face. "Miss Brooks," he said, his tone tightening. "This court does not respond well to theatrics disguised as confidence." Maya did not flinch. "I am not asking the court to respond to confidence, Your Honor. I am asking it to respond to the law." A few heads lifted in the gallery. The bailiff shifted his stance. Even the defense attorney glanced up from his notes, curiosity creeping in despite himself. Judge Patterson exhaled sharply through his nose. "And you believe quoting statutes will somehow make up for the fact that you do not belong at that table." Maya felt Teresa's hand brush her sleeve. A silent plea. "Please stop before this gets worse." This was the edge. Maya could feel it clearly now. The place where silence would be safer, where backing down would preserve dignity, even if it cost everything else. She thought of all the times she had been told to wait her turn, to be patient, to let adults handle it. She thought of how often waiting meant losing. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "I belong here because my client has no one else." Every attorney she contacted declined because her case was not profitable, not because it lacked merit. The defense attorney cleared his throat, uncomfortable. Judge Patterson's eyes narrowed. "That may be unfortunate, Miss Brooks, but it does not change the rules." Maya nodded. "No, sir, it does not. But the rules also do not say justice is reserved for those who can afford representation." That landed, not loudly, not dramatically, but it landed. The judge opened his mouth to respond, then paused. His fingers tightened slightly around his pen. "You are walking a thin line," he said. Maya met his gaze. "I am aware." There was no challenge in her voice, no defiance, only certainty. She took a breath, slow and controlled. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for the same opportunity the law promises everyone in this room, to be heard on the merits." The courtroom had gone still again, but this time it felt different. Less amused, more alert. Judge Patterson leaned back, studying her now as if seeing her for the first time, not as a child, not as a novelty, as a problem. "Very well," he said at last. "You may proceed, but understand this court will hold you to the same standard as any licensed attorney. Any mistake will be yours alone." Maya inclined her head. "I understand, Your Honor." Teresa let out a shaky breath beside her. As Maya turned toward the podium, she felt the shift fully settle. There was no turning back now. She was no longer the quiet girl with a well-organized folder. She had chosen to stand in a space that was never built for her, to speak in a room that expected her silence. And whatever happened next, the system would not forget that she had done it without raising her voice, only by refusing to step aside. The shift in the courtroom did not happen all at once. It crept in quietly, almost reluctantly, as Maya began to speak. Her voice was calm, not rehearsed, not dramatic. She did not perform for the room or pause for effect. She simply laid out facts the way they existed on paper, one after another, steady and unembellished. As she spoke, the whispers faded. At first, it was subtle. A lawyer stopped scribbling notes. Someone in the gallery leaned forward without realizing it. The soft rustle of paper died out, replaced by a stillness that felt earned rather than enforced. The defense attorney shifted in his seat. He glanced at his file, then back at Maya, then at the judge. His confidence thinned with each sentence she delivered. This was not how this was supposed to go. He had expected nerves, mistakes, a flustered teenager collapsing under pressure. Instead, he was listening to clear citations, precise language, arguments that followed logic instead of emotion. The judge watched more closely now, not approving, not hostile, just attentive. Eyes that had once carried quiet amusement now carried calculation. Across the room, a few expressions hardened, others softened. The looks that once dismissed Maya outright now hovered somewhere between disbelief and concern. But the consequences did not wait for the ruling. They came fast, and they came from outside the room. By the time court recessed, phones were already out. Photos had been taken. Headlines were drafted before anyone knew how the day would end. Teen courtroom stunt shocks, local judge. Child tries to play lawyer in an eviction case. Genius or gimmick. Maya did not read them at first. Teresa did. She scrolled in silence while they sat on a bench in the hallway, her face tightening with every swipe. "They are laughing at you," Teresa said finally, her voice low. "Some of them, anyway." Maya took the phone and skimmed quickly. The comments were worse than the headlines. Some praised her courage, called her brilliant, said she was inspiring. Others were cruel. "She needs to stay in school. This is embarrassing. Judges should shut this down before it gets out of hand." Teresa's hands trembled. What if they come after us because of this? What if the landlord does something? What if the judge gets angry? Maya felt the weight settle in her chest. Not panic, something heavier. "They will try," she said honestly. Teresa looked at her, eyes wide. Try what? To push back, to make this go away. That night, Maya sat at her desk and stared at her notes, untouched. Notifications buzzed on her phone until she turned it face down. She had done everything right. She knew that. And yet, the truth had not wrapped itself around her like armor. It had exposed her. For the first time, she understood something no book had ever taught her. Being right was not protection. The law did not stand up on its own. It waited, silent, passive. It needed someone willing to stand in front of it and take the first hit. Maya leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes. The courtroom had listened. That mattered. But the world outside had noticed too, and it was already deciding what kind of price she would pay for refusing to stay quiet. The response came quickly, and it did not come quietly. Daniel Reynolds did not wait for the court to rule. He did not wait for evidence to be weighed. He struck back the only way men like him ever did, through accusation. 2 days after Maya's first appearance, a uniformed officer knocked on Clara Brooks' front door just after sunset. The porch light flickered as Maya opened it, her stomach tightening before a word was spoken. "Miss Brooks," the officer said, polite but distant. "We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions." "About what?" "An allegation has been made regarding falsified documents submitted to the court." The words felt unreal. Falsified. Documents. Court. Maya nodded slowly. She did not argue. She did not protest. She only glanced back toward the living room where Teresa sat on the couch, frozen, her hands pressed together as if in prayer. Teresa's face drained of color. At the station, Maya sat in a small room with a metal table and a ticking clock. The walls were bare. The questions were not, "Where did you get the emails? Who helped you prepare the case? Are you aware that submitting false evidence is a crime?" Maya answered calmly, truthfully, each response precise. Still, the fear crept in. Not fear for herself. Fear for what this would do to Teresa. What if the case collapsed? What if the landlord used this to intimidate her into giving up? What if everything Maya had touched became a liability? Outside the station, news broke. Teen legal prodigy under investigation. Questions raised about courtroom claims. Was the judge fooled? The tone changed overnight. Support turned cautious. Praise turned skeptical. Commentators began using words like too polished and suspiciously prepared. Maya stopped getting messages from classmates. Teachers avoided the subject. Even neighbors looked away when she passed. Teresa called her late that night, voice shaking. What if they retaliate? What if he raises the rent? What if they take my kids? Maya closed her eyes as she listened. This was the cost no one warned her about. Not humiliation, not embarrassment. Isolation. The system did not shout at her. It did something far worse. It tightened quietly. Requests for documents, delays, motions filed without warning. The defense suddenly aggressive, confident that pressure would do what arguments could not. Maya sat alone at her desk, the same neat folders now feeling fragile. She had followed the rules. She had respected the process. And still, the ground was giving way. For the first time, doubt whispered not about the law, but about protection. Doing the right thing did not mean the system would stand between you and harm. Sometimes it simply watched to see if you would fall. Maya stared at the eviction notice taped to Teresa's door in her mind, and something inside her hardened. This was the lowest point, not because she was wrong, but because she finally understood the truth no one taught her. Doing right did not guarantee safety. It demanded endurance. The truth did not arrive with a confession. It surfaced quietly, the way real lies often unravel, through patterns that stopped making sense the longer Maya stared at them. She had returned to the documents after midnight, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking clock in the hallway. Clara had gone to bed hours earlier, trusting Maya enough not to ask her to stop. That trust weighed heavier now than any threat from the outside world. Maya spread everything out again. Emails, payment records, statements submitted by the defense. The very materials Daniel Reynolds had accused her of fabricating. She read them slower this time, not to understand what they said, but to understand how they were meant to be believed. That was when the cracks appeared. The formatting on 2 emails matched perfectly, down to spacing that no email client naturally produced. A witness affidavit referenced a maintenance request that had never existed. Dates aligned too neatly, as if they had been assembled backward rather than recorded in real time. Maya leaned back, heart pounding. This was not sloppiness. It was construction. She traced the trail further, following a company name listed on a payment receipt. It sounded harmless enough, the kind of generic title no one questioned. She searched business records, then ownership, filings. The name appeared again, and again, each time tied back to Reynolds. shell companies, layered, clean on the surface, designed not to create value, but distance. Distance between him and the lie. The witnesses followed the same pattern. Maya recognized it once she stopped treating their statements as independent voices. 2 had worked properties linked to Reynolds. 1 had received payments routed through the same shell entity weeks before signing an affidavit. None of them had come forward out of conscience. They had been hired. Maya closed her eyes, a slow breath leaving her chest. It would have been easier if Reynolds were simply a villain, a greedy landlord abusing power, a bad man doing bad things. But that was not the twist. The twist was how easily everyone had accepted his version, how quickly the burden of proof had shifted to her, how naturally authority had assumed credibility belonged to the man in the suit, not the girl at the podium. No one had demanded Reynolds prove his claims. They had asked Maya to disprove them. That was the moment understanding settled in. This was not about one dishonest landlord. It was about a system trained to trust power by default. The next day in court, Maya presented the evidence without spectacle. She did not accuse. She demonstrated shell company ownership records, payment trails, timeline inconsistencies, witness affiliations. The room changed again, but this time the shift was colder. Judge Patterson listened without interruption. No jokes, no sighs, no cutting remarks. When Maya finished, he sat silently, fingers steepled, eyes lowered to the bench. The defense attorney avoided eye contact. Judge Patterson finally looked up. "Miss Brooks," he said, slower than before. "These allegations are serious." "They are documented, Your Honor," Maya replied. He nodded once. There was no apology, no admission of fault, but the mockery was gone. In its place was restraint. As court adjourned, Maya passed the bench. Judge Patterson met her eyes briefly, not warmly, not kindly, but honestly. For the first time, she sensed he understood something had been exposed that extended beyond this case. Not corruption alone, complicity. Maya walked out of the courtroom with a new clarity settling over her. Silence had protected lies longer than lies protected themselves. And choosing not to speak when injustice stood plainly in front of you was not neutrality. It was participation. That realization stayed with Maya long after the courtroom emptied. It followed her down the courthouse steps, out into the late afternoon air, where reporters clustered and questions flew like accusations wrapped in curiosity. She did not stop. She did not answer. Teresa stayed close at her side, her hand gripping Maya's arm as if letting go would cause everything to collapse. Inside the car, Teresa finally spoke. "They believed him so easily," she said, staring out the window. "Even when he lied." Maya nodded, because they were taught to. Teresa turned to her. Taught what? To trust the people who look like they belong. The words felt heavier out loud. That night, Maya sat with Claire at the kitchen table. No files, no notes, just 2 cups of tea growing cold between them. "I always told you the system works if you respect it," Clara said quietly. Maya did not argue. She shook her head. "It works, Grandma, but not on its own. It works because people choose when to question it and when not to." Clara studied her granddaughter, seeing not the girl she raised, but the weight she now carried. And when they choose not to question it. Maya finished the thought. Someone gets crushed. The next court session confirmed what Maya already knew. Judge Patterson was different. He still spoke with authority, still enforced procedure, still held the room in his grip, but the edge was gone. When the defense attempted to dismiss Maya's findings as speculation, the judge shut it down immediately. When objections were raised out of habit rather than substance, he asked for justification instead of granting them automatically. He did not defend Maya, he did not praise her, but he stopped shielding power from scrutiny. That mattered. At one point, he paused mid-hearing and addressed the defense directly. "This court will not assume credibility. It will require it." The sentence landed like a quiet indictment. Maya felt no triumph, only clarity. She understood now that no one in that room was untouched by the system they served. Not Reynolds, not the attorneys, not even the judge, and not herself. She had believed the law protected those who followed it. Now she knew something deeper. The law did nothing unless someone insisted it act. And silence, especially from those who knew better, was never neutral. As she gathered her papers at the end of the day, Maya caught her reflection in the glass door. She looked the same, but she was not. She was no longer the girl who trusted fairness to arrive on schedule. She was someone who understood that justice only moved when pushed, and she was no longer willing to step aside and wait. The ruling came on a gray morning, the kind that made the courthouse feel colder than it already was. Judge Patterson's voice was steady as he read through his decision. There was no drama in it, no flourish, just conclusions drawn from evidence that could no longer be ignored. The eviction was unlawful. The lease had not been violated. The plaintiff was to remain in her home. Teresa did not cry at first. She sat still, hands pressed to her knees, as if afraid movement might undo the words she had just heard. When it finally sank in, her shoulders collapsed forward and a single breath escaped her, half sob, half laugh. "Thank you," she whispered to Maya, her voice breaking. "Thank you for not letting them erase us." Maya nodded, a small smile flickering across her face before fading just as quickly. Outside the courtroom, the consequences moved faster than relief. Federal investigators appeared before the news cycle even caught up. Quiet men in plain suits. Subpoenas. Financial records pulled apart with the patience of people who had done this many times before. Daniel Reynolds did not speak to reporters. His name appeared in headlines alongside words like inquiry and potential charges. Shell companies, witness payments, patterns that no longer looked accidental. The system, slow and reluctant, had finally turned its attention toward him, but it did not stop looking at Maya. Cameras followed her down courthouse steps. Strangers said her name as if they knew her. Her phone buzzed constantly. Half of the messages praise, the other half something colder. "Be careful. You made powerful enemies. You think you won." One night, Maya noticed the same car idling across the street from her house. The next evening, it was gone. The night after that, it was back again. She did not tell Teresa. She did not tell Clara right away either. The threats never came directly. They did not need to. Anonymous messages, accounts with no names, warnings framed as advice. "This is bigger than you. Walk away while you still can." Maya lay awake at night staring at the ceiling, the quiet no longer peaceful. Her world had shrunk. Routines felt exposed. Privacy became a memory she had not realized she would miss so quickly. Justice had been served, and it had taken something with it. She understood now that victory did not always feel like triumph. Sometimes it felt like standing alone in the aftermath, counting what you had lost, and realizing you would choose the same path again, because turning back would cost even more. The weeks after the ruling blurred together. Teresa moved back into a version of her life that finally felt stable. Her children slept without fear of boxes stacked by the door. She laughed more easily now, though sometimes she would pause mid-sentence, as if waiting for something bad to interrupt again. Maya watched that change quietly. It was the only part of the victory that felt real. Everything else carried weight. Reporters stopped showing up, but strangers did not. People recognized her at the grocery store. Some smiled, others stared too long. A few leaned in and whispered encouragement like it was a secret. One afternoon, a man she did not know approached her outside a cafe. He spoke softly, almost kindly. "You are brave," he said. "Just remember, bravery attracts attention." Maya did not respond. She waited until he walked away before letting out the breath she had been holding. At home, Clara noticed the change before Maya admitted it. "You do not sleep the same," Clara said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table. "You listen more than you used to." Maya gave a tired smile. "I learned some lessons early." Clara reached across the table and took her hand. "Not all lessons are meant to be learned this way." Maya squeezed her fingers gently. "But some are." The federal investigation into Reynolds expanded quietly. More names surfaced. More properties. More stories from tenants who had never believed anyone would listen to them. Each revelation confirmed what Maya already knew. This was never about one landlord. It was about how many people had learned to survive by staying silent. Late one night, Maya sat alone on the porch, the neighborhood still, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The air was cool. Honest. She thought about the courtroom, the silence, the moment everything shifted. She had crossed a line that day, not into danger, into responsibility. Justice had demanded a price, and she had paid it in comfort, anonymity, and certainty. But she was still standing. And for the first time since the ruling, Maya allowed herself to accept what that meant. This was not the end of the cost. It was the beginning of a life that would never again be untouched. The victory had not lifted her. It had awakened her, and that, she understood now, was the real weight of justice. Maya did not disappear after the case ended. That was what some people expected, that she would retreat back into anonymity once the headlines faded and the attention shifted elsewhere, that the pressure, the threats, the weight of it all would convince her to step quietly out of view. She did not. Instead, she started small. A borrowed room in a community center, folding chairs, a donated desk with a wobbling leg, a handwritten sign taped to the door that read, "Legal help available, no cost." She called it the Justice Collective. There was no grand announcement, no press conference, just word of mouth. A mother told another mother, a tenant told a co-worker. People showed up carrying envelopes thick with worry and thin with hope. Maya listened. She did not promise miracles. She promised honesty. Sometimes the law helped, sometimes it did not. But no one was turned away for being poor, afraid, or tired. Teresa came the first day with coffee and a stack of printed flyers. She did not sit quietly in the corner. She greeted people, explained forms, held hands when voices shook. "I know how this feels," she told them. "You are not crazy, and you are not alone." Maya watched her move through the room and understood something quietly profound. Justice was not abstract anymore. It had a face, a rhythm, a responsibility. Across the city, in a courtroom that no longer echoed with mockery, Judge Richard Patterson read filings with a little more care, asked questions he once would have waved away, not out of guilt, not out of apology, out of awareness. He never contacted Maya, never acknowledged her directly, but when cases involving unrepresented tenants crossed his bench, he slowed down. He listened. Silence, when chosen carefully, could also be a form of change. One evening, long after the chairs had been stacked and the lights dimmed, Maya locked the office door and leaned back against it, exhausted. This was harder than court. There were no clean endings here, no final rulings. Just people standing at the edge of losing everything, asking if anyone would stand with them. Maya thought back to that first day. The laughter, the assumptions, the moment she decided not to lower her eyes. She finally understood what that moment had asked of her. Justice does not arrive to save anyone. It arrives to ask a question. Are you willing to stand up, even when your voice shakes, even when the room does not want to hear it? Maya turned off the light and stepped into the quiet street, carrying the echo with her. Some courtrooms fall silent, not because justice was served, but because it finally spoke back. Time moved forward, the way it always did. Cases came and went. Some ended in quiet victories. Others ended with hard truths and no clean solutions. The Justice Collective grew slowly, unevenly, held together more by resolve than resources. Maya never called herself a leader. She corrected people when they tried to make her a symbol. She was just someone who stayed. Stayed when the paperwork was overwhelming. Stayed when the law was frustrating. Stayed when the outcome was uncertain and gratitude was replaced by anger or despair. That, she learned, was what most people needed. Not a savior, not a promise. Someone who did not leave. Teresa became the heart of the place. She knew which forms scared people most. She knew when to sit beside someone instead of across from them, when to explain, when to just listen. Sometimes late in the evening, after everyone else had gone, Teresa would look at Maya and shake her head. If you had stayed quiet that day, none of this would exist. Maya would smile faintly. If I had stayed quiet, I would not recognize myself. Across the city, Judge Patterson continued his work. He never spoke publicly about the case, never defended himself, never rewrote history, but the courtroom felt different now. Not softer, not kinder, more awake. The kind of awareness that does not announce itself, but lingers in the way questions are asked, in the pauses before decisions, in the refusal to assume that authority equals truth. No one in the system was innocent. Maya understood that now. Not the judges, not the lawyers, not even the people who benefited from it. But awareness changed responsibility. One evening, as Maya locked up the office, she stood for a moment in the quiet hallway, listening to the distant sounds of the city. Sirens, traffic, life continuing without ceremony. She thought about that first silence. The one that had wrapped itself around the courtroom after the laughter died. That silence had not been empty. It had been full of reckoning. Justice had not arrived with thunder or applause. It had arrived with discomfort, with hesitation, with a question no one could ignore anymore. And Maya knew now that this was the real echo. Not the verdict, not the headlines, not the victories, but the moment people were forced to hear what they had spent so long dismissing. Some courtrooms fall silent, not because justice was served, but because it finally spoke back. The silence did not fade after the doors closed. It followed Maya into every room she entered, not as fear anymore, but as memory. A reminder of what happens when power is questioned instead of obeyed. When someone chooses to speak at the exact moment the system expects submission. The Justice Collective never became famous in the way people imagine. There were no billboards, no documentaries at first, just a steady flow of people who arrived tired, cautious, and unsure whether telling their story would matter this time. Some days Maya won cases, some days she did not. But every day someone walked out knowing they had been heard without being mocked, rushed, or dismissed. And that, Maya learned, was its own form of justice. She grew older, sharper, less surprised by resistance. The threats never fully disappeared, but they changed shape. Subtle, polite, bureaucratic. The kind that reminded her that systems rarely forgive those who expose their blind spots. Judge Patterson retired quietly years later. No public reckoning, no apology tour. But on his last day, he paused longer than usual before leaving the bench, his eyes scanning the courtroom one final time. Some said he was looking for something. Others said he already knew what he had seen. Teresa's children grew up believing that courts were places where voices mattered, not just titles. That belief alone felt revolutionary. As for Maya, she never claimed the system was fixed. She knew better. She knew justice was not a destination, but a tension, a constant negotiation between comfort and courage, between silence and consequence. And sometimes, late at night, when the city quieted and the office lights were the only ones still on, Maya would think back to that first courtroom, to the laughter, to the pause, to the moment everything shifted without permission. She understood now that the most dangerous thing she had done was not winning the case. It was proving that the system could be made uncomfortable, because once a system learns it can be questioned, it never truly sleeps the same again. And somewhere, in some courtroom not yet imagined, silence would fall once more.